Automated Podcast.
Welcome to Automated. I'm your host, Mark Verbenkov, and in this weekly podcast, we will be exploring the impact of emerging technology on jobs, society, as well as us, with business and technology leaders, researchers, and independent professionals across the world. In today's episode, we will be revisiting the topic of virtual reality and specifically talk about how the pandemic has changed interest in it, what businesses can use VR specifically for, what different kind of value employees get from using virtual reality, and the future of virtual reality use. So to discuss these topics, I am joined by Andreas Christiansen, who is a tech entrepreneur and currently with MeetinVR as the VP of Customer Success. So he has 6 years of experience within B2B and SaaS as an advisor, founder, and responsible for product and analytics. In 2017, Andreas was named one of Denmark's top 100 talents, and as will come up in the episode, since his ambitious career start, he has found a little bit more interest in a more balanced and holistic approach to life. So if, like me, you are now working remotely and see this form of work continuing, and want to know a little bit more about how VR can be relevant in your work, I think that this conversation will be a little bit more relevant to you. Great. Well, Andreas, thank you very much for coming on to the Automated Podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Great. So one of the things I like to do with all my guests when they first come on to get a little bit more of a personal connection with you is to understand what made you originally interested in the topic. We'll be talking about VR today quite a bit. So what initially got you interested in that?
So actually my interest in VR came more as a side thing than it was kind of a little bit of a coincidence, you could say. Like around a year ago, I started to really have this interest in teaching, and particularly kind of meditation and kind of how to work with your consciousness to get more awareness in your life and happiness. That's really what it's all about. And then I because I had a background as a tech entrepreneur, I was kind of thinking, maybe I can kind of build like a tech product around, leverage some of my kind of knowledge as an entrepreneur. And also that could, like, because there are many people teaching meditation, and that could kind of be an edge. That was how I thought about it in my mind. And what happened, and I had seen these kind of fractal visualizations. I don't know if you're aware of like fractal mathematics.
Sure. Yeah. I'm also a practicing meditation guy. So I've been doing it for quite a long time. So I understand also within the whole COVID lockdown situation, I think there was a massive gravitation towards meditation apps in general. So whether they're fractal or guided or otherwise, I think I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, well, the idea was to like create the ultimate meditation machine, and then using these kind of fractal visualizations in 360, and had that as like an added component. There is actual research suggesting that fractals have a very common effect, and potentially are able to like make the kind of analytical mind a bit more let's say make it passive, so it's not so active, and try to digest, which is really what you want to do in the initial phases of learning meditation. Anyways, that kind of coincidentally, through working on this VR startup, I bumped into the guys I'm working with now in MeetinVR, because we were just at the same place and only having that VR thing in common. And I was just seeing what they were doing, and it looked really awesome. And that was right before the pandemic. And we were talking about maybe I should help them a little bit, just like on a consultancy basis with some business strategy and stuff like that. And then the pandemic hit, and it was like, okay, I can either jump on board on their ship or kind of struggle my way through the first 3 years that they had already kind of gone through. So I just decided, like, why make it hard? for myself.
Right.
And yeah, so here we are almost a year after, I guess.
Perfect. Great. Well, I think that's one of maybe the more interesting backgrounds that somebody's given onto the podcast. It's rare that, meditation and some sort of interesting introspection leads you into either VR or some of the other technologies that we talk on here. So great to hear. We have talked about VR a number of times on the podcast. So I think what would be good is if we just kind of dive into what is the company that you're working with, MeetinVR. I looked at it quite a bit on the online. It'd be great to hear a little bit from yourself, kind of, what is it, what makes it different from other platforms, and kind of what makes you excited about it.
I think initially what made me excited about it was that I saw the founders demo it for people. And I mean, I didn't actually need to know a lot more than that, because I just saw people's reactions, and it was just kind of this gut level feeling of awe, like, holy fuck, is this really possible? Like, oh, sorry, can I curse on this?
Yeah. Go ahead. No worries.
Yes. No, but people were so blown away, and I just gravitate towards those kind of expansive moments in my life. I feel like that's what an important part of what life is about. So I knew kind of in my gut that this technology, it can do something, and that was kind of what was kind of sparking that interest there. And also I have always had this idea, being a tech entrepreneur, like for working also in my own company a couple of years back. I wanted to do something kind of infrastructural, because I felt like I've been kind of dabbling more in these kind of a bit more abstract. I had the first company I started was kind of a personality profile company, so you could kind of measure and figure out if somebody would sell a lot based on their personality traits and stuff like that. Actually, it was like kind of machine learning, or at least linear regressions. But it was kind of a nice to have, and I was thinking, okay, I want to work in something which people definitely need. So that was kind of how I got into it initially.
And I think now that with the COVID pandemic still upon us, rooms where we can meet in VR specifically are maybe more needed than at any other time in the past. For the listeners though, can you maybe describe what MeetinVR is? I think the idea is relatively simple to grasp, but I think that the impact that it would have is actually quite interesting.
Yes, of course. We forgot about that. So MeetinVR is it's a virtual meeting room. It has everything you would expect from being in a meeting with somebody. You're represented. You have like a character. It's kind of like a game. You have your headset on. You have a character that looks like you, and then you're meeting in a virtual meeting room. And so it's a lot like it's kind of what's it called, a substitute for Zoom and video calls. And what it can do that video calls kind of cannot do is that feeling of being together with the people that you're meeting with. And it's just like right now, for example, like if I'm looking at you, I'm not looking into the camera, so we'll never really get that feeling of like eye contact and that feeling of true like presence and felt like attention. And I think that's actually one of the reasons. There are many theories as to why video calls are not as fulfilling as meeting in person. I think actually my my theory is that it's really about what we like as humans is feeling other people's attention on us, not just for like narcissistic reasons, but just nice that somebody's actually listening to us. It feels like we are heard, we are seen, right? And you just don't get that feeling when you're on a video call. You have a feeling of speaking and exchanging information, but essentially because that just because you miss those head movements and those kind of cues that you are normally taking from your environment about people actually being there, and all of a sudden you don't have those cues, the experience end up feeling lacking somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say like a few things about what this is particularly good for. Certain meetings are more where there are certain meetings where it's more important to have that feeling, although ideally you would have it all the time, but it's just that there is some barriers in terms of just getting your headset on and you know, having the app installed and setting up the infrastructure, which means that, you know, you wouldn't want to just move all your meetings to VR all of a sudden. So you would start with the meetings where, let's say maybe you're having some kind of team event, and you, with the emphasis on the togetherness and the creating that kind of feeling within the team of, you know, and this is what we're hearing from our customers, who are, some of them are, you know, the biggest consultancies, big tech companies, big pharma companies, and so on. What the people who are then in these meetings, they tell us is, I felt like I was with my colleagues for the first time in months, right? And it's just very reliable that people will say this stuff when they meet in there. And so it's really fun to be able to witness that when you see, you know, I mean, intelligent and creative people who are meeting each other again, and kind of there is that playful openness and yeah, it's been a real, yeah, I just felt really fortunate to be able to, that, you know, that's what I do for work, is I have those kind of conversations and guide people through that experience. That's really awesome. Yeah.
That's really cool. This has actually been something that I've been trying to push in my own work, my own the job that I have on the side as well. We have a number of these large collaborative projects across Europe, and many of these projects, some, like, they've been running for about a year now, and sometimes no people have actually met face to face because it's all happened in the pandemic, and there's a kind of a lack of connection, as you were talking about, but also like an ability to work efficiently, because you don't necessarily know who your partner is, right? Who your colleague is, because we're also working across organizations, across countries. So I can only imagine what it would be like for colleagues that work in the same organization that, you know, probably have worked together for years, and really feeling that sense of connection or that sense of presence, as you said, through an app like MeetinVR for the first time in, you know, 6, 8, 10 months. Must be really interesting to see. One question I do have about the product itself. So I know that there are some other ones out there that have location-based audio. Does MeetinVR have that as well? For the listeners, this is where, like, if your digital avatar is closer to the other avatar, the audio volume is increased. But if you're further away, then you don't necessarily hear them, or the volume is decreased. So it's good for like a networking event, but maybe not so good for a presentation, because everybody would then have to kind of congregate around the speaker in order to hear them properly.
Yeah, I mean, our environment, we have that spatial audio, but our environments are sort of designed around particular use cases. So it's not like you would be in a conference room and then not be able to hear the speaker in that sense, because the conference room is built as in such a way that, you know, you may be able to have a small side conversation, but you would still hear what's going on at the presenter's kind of position. And that's, like, in general, I guess the biggest maybe differentiator, or what you call it, is that we have put a lot of thought into designing those environments, and they're really tailored around the specific kind of different use cases that you would do in the app.
And there are different rooms for the specific use cases that you're saying. So you'd have like a meeting room, a conference room, maybe some sort of like design room.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And you were saying that you had larger organizations using this, like large pharmaceuticals, et cetera. Is there a diversity in your customer base, or is it mostly these larger organizations that might have a little bit more overhead to play around with?
Yeah, I mean, we also have some small customers, but but that works mostly on like a self onboarding basis. So I'm very much focused around driving the conversations with the bigger clients. It's simply because the transaction fee is not high enough that we can have like that we can have like be in contact with everyone, especially if it's like we're talking about a 100 or 200 euros per month. There's just not at this point resources to be in contact with everyone.
Of course.
Yeah.
And one of the other things that you mentioned was that, like the challenges or the barriers to this kind of adoption. Can you jump into that a little bit? Because I mean, I personally have been using VR for about 2 years now, and at the beginning it was relatively simple, but you still have this kind of clunky thing on your face, and trying to move around in some sort of digital environment if you've never done that before can be a little bit challenging. Is this kind of what you're experiencing with many of your customers, or is there kind of a group of people that are able to uptake this technology a little bit faster than others?
Yeah, so there's definitely some barriers, and that's like, but also those barriers are just continuously being removed. It's a very interesting kind of point in the evolution of the technology now, where for example, just the headsets. I mean, just every year they get almost like 50% lighter, 50% better resolution, 50%. I mean, more processing power. It's really just kind of just like it was in the early days of the iPhone, where you just don't want to miss out on, because each model is so much better, right? So there's really happening these kind of evolutionary steps in the industry. This is both like on the accessibility, like on the software side, and on the hardware side. So it's definitely been a challenge for us as a company. But obviously that's also where a lot of the knowledge and the value in a company like us lies, and then the support that we are able to give enterprises is that we have worked through these things, and we know kind of how you put together the agenda, how you put together the distribution of the headsets, the setup, make sure that everyone knows what to do, when to do it, so people get a good experience from it.
Okay. And I think it might also be interesting for those listening to give kind of a general price point, like what can clients expect to pay for this? Because I think that even for many people, when you're talking about VR, it's kind of a bit of a black box, especially around pricing.
Yeah, I mean, let's say if you're an enterprise and you have 5 to 10 users in a team, and let's say you're doing some weekly meetings and some additional, maybe some other things also, you'd probably be looking at something like 1,500 euros per month, or something like that, maybe around that, for 10 users or something like that.
And that includes obviously using the platform, the MeetinVR.
That's for the software, yeah. And then you would have the headset pricing on top of that, and there's kind of various models there. I mean, I guess you could either purchase the headsets outright or rent them, according to preferences. Maybe that would be, how much would that be? Yeah, I mean, it all depends on how exactly you finance it, of course. But maybe it would be an additional 1,500 euros if you think about like spread the cost out over a period
Yeah, because I think like the Oculus Quest 1, which I have, I think runs somewhere in the neighborhood of like 350 euros or $350, something like that. Whereas I know that there are some headsets out there that can cost, upwards of $1,000. So I guess it really depends on how great you want to have that resolution and how great you want to have that experience.
Yeah, I mean, you can get headsets way more expensive than €1,000 as well. Yeah, that's true. I mean, we recommend the Oculus headset normally, just because if you think about the pricing and the performance, it's a pretty good combination for these kind of meetings. Whereas there are headsets which are way better in terms of quality, and if you have like a gamer computer and those kind of things, you can really do some insane stuff.
Cool. I want to go back to something that we touched on at the beginning, and this is kind of the impact that COVID has had. So obviously COVID has made more interest in VR over the last year or so. Can you maybe touch on a little bit specifically how MeetinVR has dealt with this? I'm assuming, increased use of your product, but maybe just also different industries or different groups that have been interested in it?
I would not say that I experienced like a change in the sense of like who was interested, but we definitely got maybe 5 or 10x the amount of inbound in the months like after the pandemic. And a little bit of the challenge with that was that some of it is that, there's many people who are very early that they don't really have a use case in mind. So it's more like there's some general curiosity and they just want to, kind of see what's going on. And so that's like, if I were to point it at like that's definitely been a challenge, but I think it's like that with all kind of early stage technology, is that there's really like a big difference between the intent with which people are seeking it out. Like some people, they know exactly, like they kind of understand, they have a clear vision of what they want to achieve and what they want to do. And it's a very different process working with someone like that than somebody who's like, oh, what is this? Like, this looks kind of interesting. And, yeah, it's not that there's anything wrong with it, but, if you're a startup and you also want to, you want to grow your revenue, you want to scale and those kind of things, it's very important to be discerning regarding how you invest, the few resources that you have as a sales team, and also that you pick customers that are in line with your kind of growth trajectory and your so it's really that kind of back and forth between what features are we building, which markets, which customers are they relevant for, can we see that there's like a viable path for us to scale along this kind of vertical. And that's why I mean, that's what I find most interesting about my job, is that kind of thinking back and forth between the very practical conversation I'm having. I do some sales conversations as well to make sure that we have multiple eyes on the pipeline we're getting, on the opportunities, and because it's impossible if you're if you're pre A round funding in the startup community. It's like and there's still some work to do on the product market fit. You really need to understand the whole journey from customers, like what are they seeing in the marketing, like what's drawing them into the platform, why are they signing up, and all the way to, are we able to then fulfill those needs in terms of the use cases, and do we see that in our data and the things that we track on. It's like, if you have any kind of silos there, you're never gonna make the full calculation works. So that's my personal interest, is bridging the gap and that information all the way from the sales to the customer success and to the development team. Yeah.
And then for some of those use cases that you're experiencing that your customers are asking for, is there maybe one or two that are you see more in your clients than others? Like, is MeetinVR, I think my question is MeetinVR used for like one or two very specific use cases by a broad number of customers, or is it kind of scattering all over the place?
So that's like a really good question, and also because yeah, I mean, so one of the challenges is, of course, that there are certain use cases that more people will ask about, but where the incremental value, for example, of using VR is not that much bigger to, let's say, a Zoom call, right?
Right.
So, for example, one of the cases that we get quite a lot is agile meetings, right? People are thinking it would be cool to do like maybe our daily stand-up or maybe our like weekly or bi-weekly sprint meetings in VR. And it's, and especially because I mean the daily scenario, especially where the technology is where it is, and you know, if you're having a lot of video meetings and so on, I personally still don't think that the technology is where it makes sense to introduce it as like we're going to do our daily stand-up in you know, in VR, just because the barrier is just too big and people have ingrained having this ingrained way of doing it. So that, but if you have these cases more like it's a workshop, it's a like it could be like a strategy workshop, it's a team get together, it's some kind of more special event, and you want to create an experience for people. That's where I think it really makes sense now. And I think in a year or two, the technology will definitely evolve, and probably we're going to spend all our working time in VR. I think in a couple of years, right? But for now, yeah, that's how I would.
That's a good takeaway. Yeah. Yeah, because it's always interesting, I guess, to hear like what the actual uses are for VR, because I think it's still relatively new or fresh for many industries or organizations out there. It's not, for instance, Zoom is used by almost everybody or some derivative of Zoom. But when it comes to VR, I think there might be a mental hurdle for some of these organizations out there, as to think like, why would I use VR if I can just use Zoom? But if you're explaining that there are these specific things that are more valuable in VR or to do in VR than it is over Zoom, then yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, well, I mean, and there's also that other component to that, which is that people who haven't tried VR, they really don't know the added benefit, and that's kind of what we're up against oftentimes, is people have to try to know how cool it is to actually have a meeting in VR.
Yeah.
You cannot kind of just explain it because it's a feeling, you know, it's and you know it when you know it. And it's interesting because many business decisions are taken, the way many organizations still work is that they take their decisions based on numbers, and they seem to not honor the intuition and the fact that that there's just some things that are hard to quantify, and that doesn't mean that they don't have value. And you know, and especially things like creativity, problem solving, those kind of things, it's like they can be very hard to measure. Like, are we actually getting more information translated doing this, you know, the time we're having together in this channel than in a video call or in a normal call? There's been some research showing that VR is more effective for teams doing problem solving, and there are some tests apparently that you can do showing that, also showing people feeling a greater sense of belonging and satisfaction having had a video chat. And I mean, in my mind, it doesn't take a genius to translate that into better performance, economic performance as well. But for some people, they really need to see that calculation black and white. And I think ultimately, of course, that's that's the ones who's going to end up losing in the long run, because intuition and understanding how to leverage intuition and those kind of connections in the brain and so on. That's I think that's far more advanced decision making than trying to come up with a square kind of reason for necessarily doing the things you do.
Right.
Yeah.
Very interesting. One follow-up question that I have from that though is, so the clients that you're talking to, their specific employees, have you heard any feedback from those employees as to how using VR has changed their I don't know, mode of work, productivity? You referenced some of these research papers. Is that what's actually being found by some of these employees?
Yeah, I mean, we are not at the stage right now where we have been able to do research with. That's still a little too immature for us. I mean, but what we have right now is a lot of people having tried the experience and recognizing and having this emotional connection with the event that they were at, and the brand that provided this experience for them.
Right.
And feeling that it contributes to, and for those cases where it's like a recurring thing, feeling like it helps to create that sense of still doing the pandemic and still being a team, and we have some pretty interesting testimonials on that.
Cool. Well, I guess people could go onto the website and maybe read some a testimonial or two if they're interested.
Sure.
Yeah. I see that the time is winding down here a little bit. One of the questions that I like to leave the audience with and ask the guests is, like, we touched a little bit on the future vision of VR. You said that perhaps in a couple of years, most of us will be doing work over VR. Is that was that hyperbole, or is that something that you actually see in, say, 5-10 years down the line? If, of course, the pandemic continues and we were all kind of forced to work remotely, is VR really the future of work?
I think it's the future of everything,
Okay.
and potentially even the present of everything. I mean, is it Nick Bostrom or some? Are you familiar with Nick Bostrom?
Yeah. Super intelligence, right? Yeah. Warning
Yes.
of AI's destructive capability of civilization.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, I would disregard some of the destructive stuff he's saying, but I think both him and Elon Musk also maybe more famously have talked about the probability that we live in a simulation right now.
Yeah.
I mean, when you work with VR, if you have like eyes in your face, right, you see the technology is getting exponentially more powerful. It's getting smaller and smaller. You see the way in which we tend to want to integrate that technology further and further, almost into our senses, right? And in VR, it's so obvious to see how just 1 year ago, 2 years ago, with the first Quest headset, like the first kind of a little bit more mainstream headset, it's like still big and clunky, but it was all in one for the first time. And it's the cost performance ratio is just such an incredibly big improvement, right? And to the second one, incredibly big improvement. Like 2 years, 3 years from now, you're going to have glasses on and you don't even notice you have glasses on. It's going to be like a complete true to life resolution, right? Then you'll start thinking, okay, how can we use brain interact? Like, how can we put some sensors on the brain or something like that? So we don't even have to move our have faster bandwidth input in terms of how we navigate in the technology and so on. And ultimately, I mean, in my mind, you got to think about, okay, so where does that end? Where does it end? Like, really, if you really ponder where it ends, I think think about getting everything like that every time you want something. Right? Ultimately, that might actually be boring, and maybe you would want to experience something where you don't get things that you want exactly when you want it. to experience the relearning of stuff, so you don't know everything you think about instantaneously. And in my mind, that's where we are today. So
that's very interesting. Yeah, I think it kind of falls in line with this idea of kind of divergent paths, right? People that would be adopting technology at a faster and faster rate, and those people that would be going against that current and kind of maybe going back to the land, or having a more of a degrowth mindset. I think I think you said it best. It's something really interesting to ponder, and I hope that some of the listeners will do just that because of this interview. So yeah, thanks very much, Andreas, for coming on. I will have the website in the show notes. Is there any other way that you want listeners to get in touch with you, follow your work? How should people get a hold of you?
I'm on Clubhouse, and I love Clubhouse. Are you on Clubhouse as well?
I haven't gotten into the
I mean, I just recommend it so highly. It's
okay.
I see it literally as it's the biggest hope I have seen so far in terms of humanity disseminating learning effectively. Because I think podcasts are great, and it's really a way to get information out to a lot of people. But there is a certain aspect of Clubhouse, which is that participation and the dialogue is such an important part of learning, like the not being just passive. And then the fact that they're adding this kind of social network. So you don't just have let's say the Joe Rogans or whoever is like the individual who but people have access to people who are, let's say, more knowledgeable than them and can teach them some stuff. And these people have access to people who are more knowledgeable than them and teach them stuff. So I think it's going to be like the most effective, let's say, hierarchy of disseminating helpful and information that's going to move the human race forward. So I am on Clubhouse. You can find me there if you are interested. Should I just send you my name?
Yes, you can send me the link, and I'll put it into the show notes. But good to know. Awesome. I'll have to look into Clubhouse a little bit more now.
I can send you an invitation. Actually, I have an.
That'd be awesome.
That'd be awesome. You would love it. I mean, it's it's if you have niche interests and so on, it's great.
Okay, great. Well, I'll look into that then. Awesome. So Clubhouse, the website, terrific. Great. Well, Andreas, thank you very much for coming on. Really appreciate it. Thank you also for the kind of future vision that you've laid out. I hope that it makes some people ponder their present time and kind of the future movement that we're going into a little bit. Yeah, don't be scared. Yeah. Awesome. Great. Well, thanks again, Andreas.
Yeah, likewise.
Well, that's it for this week's episode. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear and you want to support the podcast and the conversations here, the best way to do this is to go onto Apple Podcasts and leave a review, as it helps the algorithm to reach out to new listeners and brings the show to them. Also, feel free to check out the website, automatedpodcast.org, where you can find the show notes for each episode, written articles on the themes of the podcast, and a library of resources on the topic of emerging tech and automation. Also, if you want to reach out and leave any feedback, or you have any questions about the podcast or any of the conversations, there are general contact links such as email, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. for you there on the website. And finally, for those of you that want more than just an audio conversation, the video recordings are now going to be up on YouTube for the newer conversations, so feel free to check out the videos by searching for Automated Podcast on YouTube, where of course you can like and subscribe if you prefer to support the podcast that way.
The Automated Podcast.